Europeans are walking into a trap set by the far right. In pockets across Europe, we are seeing far-right ideology spreading across borders and onto the streets. These clips I'm showing you are pretty disturbing, I know, but you've got to understand that people are being fed false narratives about women's rights, LGBTQ+ rights, refugees, and just blatant hatred towards anybody who isn't like them. But it's not just on the fringes of society anymore. It's made its way into policies formulated by powerful governments, be it conservative or liberal. And the scariest part is the people electing these parties into power, people like you and I, don't necessarily know that they just elected a candidate who is set out to implement these far-right ideologies. Because these parties are doing a freaking great job at hiding their deep-rooted fascist beliefs and painting a picture of perfection like it's all still very democratic. But it isn't. So let's look at how the far right has managed to expand in Europe and how this is going to affect the future of the millions of people living here. To understand exactly why they're doing this, we need to start with the basics. So let's first look to Italy. In September of 2022, the country elected its first ever female prime minister, Giorgia Meloni, who is part of the far-right political party Brothers of Italy. Now, she co-founded this organization in 2012, and its politics are heavily influenced by Benito Mussolini, the founder of fascism. Okay. But the Brothers of Italy have been rebranding themselves as a progressive party that's capable of tackling social issues. And Meloni played a vital role in the rebranding. Let's quickly take a look at how some of her political views have changed over time. In her teenage years, she was part of the youth club of a small right-wing Italian social movement party. And Meloni has been in fact praising Mussolini by saying everything he did it for Italy, and there has been no politician like him for the past 50 years. But now she refutes all allegations that the BOI is a white supremacist and Nazi sympathizing party. Maybe people change. She was in that group when she was a teenager, but let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But this is an example of how she has been working to improve the public image of her party in disassociating from BOI's pro-fascist roots. Since 2017, this has helped the far-right gain better momentum in parliament. Just 4 years ago, Brothers of Italy had polled at only 4.3%, but this September they won the election with 26% of the votes. They simply stuck around, contested in elections, and continued to paint a softer image of the party and their ideologies. But the US and France aren't fooled by this rebrand. They promise to keep an eye on Italy to see if they uphold their commitment to human rights after Meloni's track record on abortion and LGBTQ+ rights. And speaking of France, we have to talk about what's happening there. The extreme right National Rally Party saw what could be its best post-war performance in the country. Its leader, Marine Le Pen, lost to President Emmanuel Macron on the centre-right Renaissance Party by just 18 votes. She may not have won any of the elections she ran for since 2012, but she has been gaining momentum steadily. Le Pen was even featured by Time as one of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2011 and 2015. In the 2022 election, even though the National Rally didn't win the second round parliamentary elections, they secured 10 times the seats it secured 5 years ago. That is huge. It may not be a main opposition right now, but it has enough seats in parliament to trigger a no-confidence motion, which can help her block left reforms if needed. You may soon see these impacts in the country's local and regional elections. Similarly, in Sweden, Social Democrat Magdalena Andersson resigned as Sweden's prime minister and was succeeded by Ulf Kristersson, leader of the moderate party, with the unprecedented support of the largest right-wing party in Sweden, the far-right Sweden Democrats. Three parties formed a coalition and received 50% of the votes in elections and in parliament, giving them the floor to form a government. Even though they don't have a majority, they have much more power over immigration laws. And the right-wing coalition won the election by bagging 176 seats, whilst the left won 173. In Hungary, President Viktor Orbán behaves like two sides of a coin. He took a neutral stance on the Ukraine war to maintain close economic ties with Russia for import of Russian gas and oil, whilst also supporting Ukraine in EU meetings, but supporting Russia back home and refusing to let weapons for Ukraine cross Hungarian borders. Okay, everybody breathe for a second. That was kind of dense. Let's zoom out. You can see from those examples how even if it isn't a far-right party that came to power, the ideologies are surfacing and making their way into European politics. And this is reflected strongly in the policies that are formed. So let's look at one of the most important issues that the far right has used as leverage to come this far: the 2015 European migrant crisis. This is the Western Balkan route, the main migratory pathway into Europe. In 2015, hundreds of thousands of refugees fleeing from war in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and sub-Saharan Africa attempted to cross the Mediterranean Sea to Europe. And when they do reach Europe, they've got to follow something called the Dublin Regulation, which says that migrants must request asylum in the first EU country that they land on. These countries tend to be Italy, Spain, Cyprus, Greece, and Malta. So these countries must take responsibility for registering asylum seekers. Matteo Salvini, who is the Deputy Prime Minister of Italy, has blamed the EU for its lack of control over migration policies in the past decade, and intends to deport 500,000 illegal migrants. In fact, in 2018, polls showed that 35% of Italians believed that immigration was one of the most important issues that their country was facing. This number had risen from 18% in 2014 in just 4 short years. And Meloni has painted a picture that a rising crime is an effect of illegal migrants in the country. She capitalized on the public's growing unhappiness against the left, which was unable to deal with the rising crime and settling of illegal migrants and refugees. This is a classic example of how immigration as a topic is used to win over voters under the pretense of keeping borders safe. And it's not just what they say, it's how they say it that gets into people's heads. Take Rishi Sunak, the leader of the Conservative Party and the UK's first Prime Minister of colour. He advocates to keep our borders under control. And it was the same old narrative in the Brexit campaign. The UK's new Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, said that
I would love to be having a front page of the Telegraph with a plane taking off to Rwanda. That's my dream. That's my dream.
When will that happen? Those were her actual words. Even countries like Sweden, which is known to be super accepting of migrants and refugees, is cutting back. In 2015, Sweden took in over 150,000 asylum seekers, which was the highest amount by any European nation. But just 5 years later, they started deporting migrants and rejecting asylum seekers. Sweden Democrats even came up with a 30-point plan to restrict immigration laws and asylum policies. Under a United Nations agreement, Sweden is supposed to give mandatory protection to 5,000 refugees from third world countries, and that number will be cut to just 900. The new government says it's going to accept asylum seekers only if they're from countries in the vicinity of Sweden. And it just keeps getting worse. The government wants to subject people from outside of the EU to take DNA tests and wants them to submit their genetic profiles. I mean, this situation gets even more difficult if you're a Muslim refugee seeking asylum, or just even a Muslim living in Europe. In Hungary, 58% of Hungarians don't favor Muslims, even though they make up less than 1% of the population. Islamophobic narratives have dominated the political world, where Islam is depicted as a violent religion, and depicting Muslim refugees as invaders. These are clips from the 2022 Easter riots that were led by far-right parties who threatened to burn the Quran and demanded the closure of borders for more refugees. Speaking of Islamophobia, we have to look at French policies. A country that has banned full face coverings such as the burqa and niqab in public spaces since 2010. Like, a woman has to pay a €150 fine if she wishes to cover her face. Le Pen's campaign promised to uphold these existing restrictions. She vowed to implement a ban on wearing a hijab in public. She's guaranteed the de-Islamization of French society, and has planned to completely stop immigration, systematically expel migrants without residency papers, and to end automatic citizenship to those born in France to foreign parents. I spent time last winter in Calais at the refugee camps, and calling them A camp is a strong word. In 2015, you may have seen images of the jungle, which was the big refugee camp. Now it looks very different, and it's already extremely hard for these people to apply for asylum in these countries. And these were by far the worst living conditions that I've seen refugees ever having to live in. When it comes to LGBTQ+ rights and abortion laws, it's not always as explicit as it is with migration. In her first address, Meloni said that she will support abortion laws, but remains quiet on LGBTQ+ rights. Le Pen, on the other hand, has relaxed far-right ideologies when it comes to same-sex marriages and abortions, in an attempt to de-demonize the extreme right National Rally Party. On the contrary, in Hungary, this wonderful man hates the LGBTQ+ community. Hungary has banned LGBTQ+ sex education. It even banned TV programs from airing content that mentions gay people or displays same-sex physical acts from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Orbán has demonized queer and trans identities. He banned trans Hungarians from changing their gender on government forms. The government also moved a constitutional provision to ban same-sex marriage in 2012 by redefining what it means to be a family. This is ridiculously sad. Listen to this. The Hungarian government defines family as relationships based on marriage and parent-child relation. The mother is a woman and the father is a man. What the f? And this has become a central part of his campaign to hold on to power. But the people aren't budging. Hungarians are more progressive than their government. For instance, when it comes to supporting same-sex couples' adoption rights, 59% of Hungarians today support it, whereas compared to just 42% in 2013. Yet the one reason all of these policies that strip people of their fundamental rights gets little attention is because the far right is damn good at shifting people's focus. They have managed to come to power by magnifying and focusing on issues such as the rising cost of living and safety of their citizens. And people are looking less and less to the left because of its inability to combat these issues. In Italy, the far right is still radical in their beliefs, but the public has managed to accept them in society. So this isn't like a quick trend you see on TikTok. The far right ideology spreading through Europe is not diminishing. If you're from Europe, I would love to know what you think in the comment section below. I, for one, find these tactics pretty fascinating and frightening. The far right may be divided today, but its support is growing. It may not seem powerful at the moment, but it sure is being accepted. A combination of how they present themselves, the shedding of the neo-Nazi image that they've carried on, and selectively supporting or not supporting rights in identity politics. And these are strategies that these groups have used to infiltrate mainstream politics across Europe.